In this video essay, we're going to go over the sympathetic division of our nervous system. We're going to go over the parasympathetic division, and we're also going to go over the somatic. The sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions fall under the autonomic nervous system, while the somatic is the branch beside of the autonomic nervous system. As you can see here, starting from our nervous system, we see that it branches off into the peripheral nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system and somatic nervous system fall under the peripheral. For each division, I want to talk about the origin in the sort of central nervous system, talk about the number of neurons in the pathway. I'm going to look at the ganglia location, the type of neurotransmitter associated with it, type of receptors associated with it, and I want to talk about the primary actions of these within that. Okay, so to get started in the sympathetic division, the origin is going to be in our thoracolumbar region, or you can say from our T1 vertebrae down to our L2 vertebrae. So T1 through 12 and then L1 through 2. For our parasympathetic division, we're going to look at the craniosacral region. So this will be the brainstem, along with our sacral regions S2 through S4. And then the somatic is going to be our spinal cord at all levels. Okay, next let's talk about the, let's say, number of neurons in these pathways. So our sympathetic division and our parasympathetic division is what we're going to call a 2-neuron chain or pathway. And this is basically saying here we have one neuron, and before it gets to its point down here, this is where it wants to go, it's going to use another neuron, a pre and post. And the parasympathetic division is going to use the exact same thing. But our somatic nervous system is just a single neuron that goes directly from the central nervous system all the way down to the muscle that it innervates. Now, the location of the ganglia in the sympathetic division is going to be near the spinal cord. So we'll say near spinal cord. You can say we have two of them. So the first one would be sympathetic chain ganglia. And the second would be collateral ganglia. Now, the difference is the sympathetic chain ganglia really only synapses above the diaphragm. It doesn't synapse below that. And the collateral chain ganglia, this is going to synapse below the diaphragm in the abdominal cavity. just write it down here. Okay, in the parasympathetic division, this is going to synapse near, or you can say within, the targeted area. Or organ. We call these, write it in blue, we'll call this terminal ganglia. And somatic has no ganglia. No ganglia. Okay. Now let's talk about the neurotransmitters associated with each of these divisions. So we're going to have two in our sympathetic and parasympathetic. One will be preganglionic, which would be in this right here, this ganglion, this neuron, and the second is going to be post. So I'm going to erase this. Okay, so for pre-ganglionic, we are going to use acetylcholine, which we'll just use that subscript. And the receptors associated with that are going to be nicotinic receptors. We'll get to that down here, though. And then our post-ganglionic, we're going to be looking at norepinephrine. And epinephrine. Also uses dopamine, but we don't focus on that in this class. Okay, now in our parasympathetic division, we are also going to use acetylcholine, and we are going to use not norepinephrine or epinephrine, but we are still going to use ACH. But the type of receptor is going to be different for the postganglionic. And then here in the somatic, we just use acetylcholine as well. So receptor-wise, we're going to have two types of receptors. So cholinergic, and then adrenergic. So cholinergic could be nicotinic and muscarinic. You really only see this in the parasympathetic, but we do use M1, muscarinic 1, for our sweat glands, but that's about it. And then our adrenergic will have alpha and beta. So here we just have cholinergic, and those are muscarinic. And receptors for somatic would just be nicotinic, which just uses acetylcholine. Okay, primary actions when we're looking at the sympathetic division. This is our fight or flight, which just means increased heart rate, could mean pupil dilation, could be things like glucose release. Our parasympathetic is going to be our rest and digest. And this is going to do things like lower heart rate or do pupil constriction. Okay, and for our somatic nervous system, it's going to be voluntary. Muscle movement, specifically skeletal muscle. Okay, so those are all the parts to fill for this. And then next, I want to talk more about our cholinergic and adrenergic receptors. Okay, so here I have the list of receptors in our autonomic nervous system. And the numbers associated with these mean something. So our odd numbers are going to excite, and our even numbers are going to inhibit. So when we're looking at this, we can say our alpha 1 adrenergic receptor is going to excite or constrict, whereas our alpha 2 is going to inhibit or relax. Okay, so these over here are the most important ones that we're going over. Our heart is going to have our B1 receptors, and because it's an odd number, we know that this will excite or constrict. The sympathetic and parasympathetic work inversely off of each other. So where the heart in the sympathetic is going to constrict, we know that the parasympathetics M2 and M4 receptors are going to inhibit or relax the heart. For lungs, beta 2 receptor, that is an inhibitory, and so that's really important for our ability to breathe properly. And so the parasympathetic nervous system is going to want to constrict that, and we'll use M1, M3, and M5 because these are odd numbers, and that we know means to excite. Our sweat glands, those are just M1, and blood vessels and eye constriction. So blood vessels are alpha 1 odd number, so that means it constricts. Eye constriction is the same, talking about smooth muscle there. And then the dilation for our eyes is M2 and M4, which are inhibitory. Yeah, here you can see our nicotinic receptors. The agonist is acetylcholine, like we talked about. Our M receptors, so here you can see through the second messenger how these actually inhibit and excite. So our M1, 3, and 5, these are actually going to increase intracellular calcium. And our M2 and M4 are going to decrease CAMP. So that's how they excite and inhibit. And you can see that here with our alpha 1, where it increases calcium, and that's how it actually excites. Our alpha 2 receptor is going to decrease CAMP just like our muscarinic. Beta 1, 2, and 3, all of these are going to increase CAMP. And beta 2, although it looks like it excites things and it's not following the rule of even numbers inhibiting, B2 uses this increase in CAMP to its advantage to help inhibit certain systems. Dopamine, scratch that, don't really need that. So yeah, each receptor type has a preference to its agonist. This is pretty important later on. So for our nicotinic and muscarinic, the agonist will always be acetylcholine. But for our adrenergic receptors, we're going to look at norepinephrine and epinephrine. Both of our alpha receptors are going to prefer norepinephrine, whereas it changes in our beta, and beta 1 has no preference. It can use both or prefers both. And then beta 2 prefers our epinephrine, whereas beta 3 is going to prefer norepinephrine over epinephrine.